All right. Welcome, everyone, to episode 21 of the podcast. And I'm freaking ecstatic to dive deep into today's topic, which is video games and SFF. I've been a gamer for a long time, and my love for the medium has never faltered despite, ebbs and flows on how much time I can actually spend playing them, mostly due to being a father. But today I have the pleasure of discussing video games with an amazing panel of authors, some of whom write for video games, others who include them into the very narratives of their books, and all of whom are deeply inspired by them in countless ways. So, first up is my good friend Nicholas Eames, making his second appearance on SFF ADDICTS. Nick is the author of Kings of the Wyld and Bloody Rose, books 1 and 2 in the fantasy series The Band. He's also one of the biggest gamers I know, so I'm happy to have you here again, buddy, and welcome back.
Thanks for having me. All of those things are true.
I hope so. I just made some shit up for your intro. So.
Perfect.
And making her third appearance on the show is J.S. Dewis. She's the author of The Last Watch and the Exiled Fleet, books 1 and 2 in the Divide series. And Jenny's also a huge Mass Effect and BioWare fan, which is why I think we get along so well. And she recently started working as a writer for Humanoid Studios, which is the new venture from former BioWare game director Casey Hudson. So welcome back to the show, Jenny, and a massive congrats on that new gig.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. And my next three guests are all making their first appearances here on SFF ADDICTS. Joining us is Austin Grossman, author and video game designer. As an author, he has written books like You, Soon I Will Be Invincible, Crooked, and more. And on the video game front, he's contributed as a writer or designer to games like System Shock, Deus Ex, Dishonored 1 and 2, Tomb Raider Legend, and more. So happy to have you here, Austin.
Thank you.
And you're also a freelance game consultant now, right?
Yes, I'm involved in a lot of stuff, most of which I can't talk about.
Mm-hmm. But if anyone out there is looking for a game consultant, you can hit him up.
True.
And we also have Ciel Pierlot with us. She is the author of Bluebird, her debut novel, which hit stores last February. She's also a digital artist and a gamer. That's gamer with a Y. And she is the proud owner of an envy-inducing lightsaber collection. So thanks for being here, Ciel. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I'm happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Ron Walters, whose hair is as luscious as always. He's the author of Deep Dive. Don't shake your head at me, buddy. His debut novel, which was released back in January. So thank you for joining us again, Ron. How are you?
No problem. I'm good. Next time I'm going to wear a ponytail.
I'm always going to talk about your hair every time you're on this podcast.
I appreciate it. It's good for me.
Exactly. So to kick things off, I want to know, what is your personal relationship with video games? When did you start playing them? And what do they mean to you all these years later? So Jenny, we'll kick it off with you.
All right. Well, I've been playing video games since before I can remember. We had a Commodore 64, which was super fun when I was a kid. We've always had computers in the house. My dad's a big computer guy, so we always had them around, and I always played games on them. And then, of course, original Nintendo, SNES, etc. My first console that was my very own was the Dreamcast, which I miss so very much sometimes.
R.I.P.
And then, I just, once I got into, late high school and into college, I kind of, got busy making films. I'm a filmmaker originally, and it's a very time-consuming hobby and career to have. So I kind of lost touch with video games for a little while until one of my roommates was like, hey, you got to play this game. You're going to love it. And it was Mass Effect 1. And I fell in love with it, and it was amazing. And that's kind of what relaunched me into starting to play again. And, just being able to afford a console even was rare. Mm-hmm. So that was his console I played that on. So I kind of lost touch again for a little while. But once I was able to have consoles again, it just mostly RPGs and some computer games. I like city builders and Sims and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And all these years later, thinking back on it, what do video games mean to you?
Originally they were just kind of entertainment, fun thing to do, something to do with friends and with, my sister and stuff. And my dad, we played King's Quest for hours and hours and hours. Had to call the tip hotline a couple times, which my mom was always happy about because back then you had to pay for phone calls.
Nuts.
Yeah. So yeah, originally kind of entertainment. And then once I started getting into storytelling, and encountering RPGs really is what did it for me, where it's like, wow, like you can experience such a powerful story through a game. Like I never really thought about it before. It was always just kind of running around doing dumb stuff with your friends. So I really attribute, you know, Mass Effect and starting to get into a lot of the BioWare games to really, I mean, I know BioWare had a lot of games before that. I just didn't have a PC. I switched to Mac because I was editing video. Gotta have a Mac. So just kind of missed out on that era of things. But yeah, so definitely became something different to me recently. And I really like the future of storytelling is really exciting for sure.
Nice. And Austin, what about you? Sort of, what's your relationship with video games? When did you
Well,
start playing them, and how's that journey progressed?
well, I was born in 1969, so I grew up with the medium, and I grew up in an area with a lot of defense contractors. So my friends had parents had actual terminals in their houses. So I started with Colossal Cave. I started with Zork. I started with the first games that were being made. And like I said, I grew up with the medium. I went all the way through text adventures, 2D arcade, and then when I started working in games was '92, when real-time 3D was just breaking, and people had to reconceive video games, which they've done repeatedly. When I started working AR and VR, we had to reconceive them again. So I've been with video games as a player or developer the entire time.
And what does it mean to you personally, since you've had a long experience and you actually work in video games as well?
Well, I mean, it means a lot of things. Obviously, there's the kind of hyper focus that you get out of it, and the kind of blur of hand-eye coordination. And with narrative and system-driven games, there's a sense of that you're being posed problems, narrative problems, situational problems, and you're in this kind of harmless play space where you can decide how you want to address them, and you kind of find your own way through a system, in a harmless way that makes you think that you can take back to your real life.
No, I mean, that's a similar thing for me, and I'll share a little bit about my experience, but first I'll toss this over to Ciel.
So oh gosh, back at like end of middle school, no, like end of elementary school, start of middle school, my parents got like a Wii and a PS3. But my problem was that I had an older brother. So all the video games that I got were kind of shared. They were shared family games, and some of them, like my brother got Metroid, and he got, I think, maybe one of the Call of Duty games or something. And I wasn't really allowed to play those. Like, he wouldn't really let me touch them that much. So I never really got to play many video games when I was a kid. Mostly just some of the Wii stuff, Super Mario Galaxy, Mario Kart, because those, like, it's not quite the same. You can have like 50 profiles or whatever the hell. I crushed on Mario Kart. My favorite map is and was Rainbow Road. I was brutal. I would play against, like, it'd be like a new person would come over to my house to play, and they'd be like, "Oh, go easy on me," and I'd be like, "No, I won't."
Relentless.
But like end of high school, start of college, I was really doing a lot of digital art. And the thing about digital art and gaming computers is the graphics requirements pretty much overlap. So I was looking to get a gaming computer because it would have the graphics I need. And I had to get laptops at first just because I was, in college and I could only have one computer and you have to take it to class, blah, blah, blah. But I started playing computer games. I still don't have a console. They're too expensive. I can only afford one very overpriced custom rig. But I started playing, I think in 2015, Star Wars The Old Republic. And I got way too into that. And then that led me to other BioWare games. And then that led me to just every game ever. I played a lot of the inspiration for my book actually was Destiny 2.
Oh, cool.
I couldn't play the first Destiny game because it was only on console, and I'm still upset by that. But I can play Destiny 2 because it's computer. Yeah, let's see. My current favorite game, Final Fantasy 14. I started playing that in November, right before their new expansion dropped. So I like snuck in right before the queue times became like 3 hours long and you couldn't even buy the game anymore. I like snuck right in and instantly became obsessed. And that's a problem for me now, you know.
Because
I'll admit that.
you're studying too, right?
Yeah, I'm
So
still in college.
it's a
I'm
very
going,
big problem then.
yeah, I'm going right from the end of spring semester to my summer semester.
Yeah.
But well, actually, because I started playing Final Fantasy back in November, I was like wrapping up finals when I was still playing the base game, and like I wasn't quite obsessed with it yet. But then I hit that obsession point basically right as my winter break started. So it'd be like wake up in the morning, log into Final Fantasy, and I'd log out at like 2 a.m. when I was going to go to sleep.
Oh, that's awesome though. And Ron, I know you you got into video games pretty late in life, or
Yeah.
you kind of got like reintroduced them. Do you want to dive into your journey with video games as well?
Yeah. I mean, I remember as a kid we had like the original NES. We had a Sega Genesis. I want to say we had an Atari. I don't remember which one. And I mean, I like playing them, but it wasn't something that stuck with me. And
Mhm.
honestly, I didn't pick up a controller probably until 5 years ago. And I don't know exactly why I decided to, other than I saw that Breath of the Wild was coming out, and suddenly I was reinterested because who doesn't
Mhm.
love Zelda? So I picked that up and was just like, I had no idea that games had become what they were. Like I was just instantly hooked. And so I moved on from there to like Horizon Zero Dawn and the newer God of War, and like I'm just when I realized that there were immersive narratives in the games, like I was reading a book but playing it at the same time,
Mm.
like I mean, immediate obsession,
Just sold,
you know.
man.
So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of bummed that I don't have all this like background in all these older games that I see people talking about, and I watch a lot of like, you know, No Clip is a cool channel. They've got a lot of cool documentaries, so I try to watch some of that stuff to kind of pick up what I lost. But I do wish I'd kept playing. But I mean, I'm glad I jumped in when I did. You know,
Yeah, and at the same time, we are kind of in the age of remasters and that
right?
kind of thing.
Yeah,
So, you know, like Mass Effect, for instance, is a series that I absolutely adore.
yeah,
And, you know, the first game is, if you were to play it on its original console, it's kind of unplayable in a lot
yeah,
of ways. But the fact that they did this remaster, the Legendary Edition, where they
yeah.
combined all three games, updated the graphics and some of the systems and stuff like that, it's like cool.
Yeah,
Reintroduce
no,
it
I
to
got that.
someone
And I
like
played
you.
through the first one and it was amazing.
Mhm.
And the same with The Last of Us.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because I played the remastered edition, so I don't really know what the huge differences between the two were, but I mean, like, it was just I was floored,
Yeah.
like
And
obsessively so.
and Nick, what about you? We'll get your take on your journey with video games and what they mean to you.
Mine started when I was about 13 years old. I think we got a Nintendo, and unfortunately, it was right at the time when my like posture was also forming, so that really fucked that up for the rest of my life. So yeah, I came at the wrong time. But I think the real game changer for me was Final Fantasy 1 when it came out. I guess maybe it was already out by then too. But my brother and I would build a fort around the TV. To this day,
Nice.
I still refer to him as Map Boy sometimes because he would hold like the guide and turn left, you know, during the Marsh Cave, and so we
Poor
played
Tyler.
we played the heck out of that game. And yeah, I've loved it ever since. And I don't think I've ever stopped playing video games. It took me a while to. I've always had pretty much any like good console that was out. I would like do whatever I could to get it. Obviously, I've skipped Xbox for the last 10 years. But it took me a while to finally get a good computer, and I love it now because I play a lot of like strategy. Like Total War is like the first time I played a Total War game, I was like, oh, this is what I was born to do, is play this game. But still, first and foremost,
not even write fantasy novels, just play Total War.
Play Total War for sure. It's way better than anything else. But I obviously Final Fantasy still holds a near and dear place in my heart. I played Final Fantasy 14. I mean, yesterday. I still play it, but I know that obsession because I played it when it first came out for about 4 months. I think I slept like 4 hours a night.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know that experience.
Yeah. And then, as many people on here, like Mass Effect was a pretty huge influence. Like I love all BioWare games, but Mass Effect was pretty huge for me too.
Yeah, man. I mean, for me personally, like it's kind of my journey is a bit of a conglomeration of a lot of what you've experienced, all of you. You know, my first console that I remember was I have 3 older brothers and the oldest is 10 years older. So they had a Super Nintendo. And then I remember there was like these 2 kids that lived around the corner from me. It's kind of like those friendships you have just because of proximity more than anything. But we would go over to their place and play Duck Hunt all the time. And that was a blast. But then from there, you know, my first console was the Nintendo 64. And even though the controller is just absolute shit, I love that console just for the, you know, the memories of playing with my brother and my friends, things like Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros and all that kind of stuff. And then at some point, I think it was actually on the GameCube where I played Baldur's Gate 2, and that was sort of like my introduction to RPGs. And from then on, I've just kind of like veered away from the more ephemeral, like just play it just for the fun kind of thing, like Mario Kart and that kind of stuff, and veered more towards storylines. And then Mass Effect was huge, huge, huge for me, that whole series. And different RPGs like I think KOTOR, even before Mass Effect, Knights of the Old Republic was the one for me that was like, oh my God, I love Star Wars. And this story just blew my mind completely. And then after that, you know, I think my gaming experience has been kind of similar to what Austin you said, where it's this like immersion space, but it's also kind of like a safe place to experiment with different decisions and kind of like morality. It's like a reflection of the real world, but there's uh no true repercussion to what is going on there. So it's like I could play with my own mind, but just in this virtual space as a means of figuring out like how I perceive the world based on that gameplay and that story and everything like that. And from there, it's just things have progressed to, you know, I really love the Dishonored series, so it's awesome to have you here, Austin. And you know, Horizon and that series, it's like I think I've kind of veered more towards third person or first person RPGs and action adventure type stuff because the narrative is really the big thing for me at this point. You know, I mentioned in the intro I have ebbs and flows, and you know I kind of have the time to really only play like 2 or 3 games a year. So for now, you know, I'm going through Horizon Forbidden West and really loving that. And then after that, I finally got an Xbox Series X, so I'm gonna dig into Cyberpunk 2077, which is one I've been waiting for since it came out. Even before that, Nick, I know you burned through that game on the PS4, which is a bit of a shame, but you had a good time with it too.
Still loved it.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, for me, it's like video games are a really meaningful extension of just like my storyteller's mindset and the kind of narrative experiences that you can have beyond books and beyond movies. It has that immersion factor that really just pulls me into a world with the visuals and the story and the gameplay experience and everything like that. So to give viewers and listeners a little bit more of a sense of you as a gamer, I want each of you to share just one of like a really memorable video game or one of your all-time favorites and why it connected with you so deeply. So Jenny, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is really hard for me because so many have. Um, I guess I don't know. If I have to pick one, I'll probably go with Dragon Age 2. Um, I was I played it at the time it came out and I loved it. It was great, but then I kind of rounded back to it a few years later, um, and played it again, and I was like, damn, this game. And I remember like when I first played it, my best friend was playing it at the time too, and we'd like talk about it and he'd be like, oh, this and this happened, that was so cool. And I was like, that happened to you? Because that's not what happened to me.
Yeah.
And there were just all these things where it was like the replayability was really strong. And I didn't actually play it too many times, but when I picked it up again, you know, later, I was like, okay, I gotta write fan fiction for this because I just have to. And that's really like I hadn't really written a lot of fan fiction prior to that. You know, when I was a kid, I wrote some Star Wars fiction when the prequels came out because I really enjoyed it, and that was kind of a big thing in my sci-fi journey was kind of when those came out. So I had written a little back then, but not since I had like become an adult or whatever you want to call me. So I started writing fan fiction for Dragon Age, and it was just super fun. And that's really what like launched me into, from there I started writing Fallout 4 fan fiction when it came out, and one of the the only story really that I wrote for that started picking up a lot of traction, getting a lot of reads and encouragement and stuff. And that's kind of what launched me into, maybe I should write a novel. So I kind of credit, Dragon Age 2 for leading me to where I am now. So yeah, it was just, the companions were amazing. It was a rough game. Like there were some horrifying things that happened.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, oh my God, that just happened. Like, what is this game rated? Like kind of stuff. And it was just really good. So
that's so cool though. Yeah. I remember you telling me that Dragon Age was kind of like your introduction into the fiction space, and we'll definitely get into that later on, but I think it's just so cool that video game inspired you to write fan fiction, and then all these years later it's like, cool, you have 2 published novels, and you got another one coming out next year with Rubicon, and yeah, it's just so awesome. And Nick, I'll toss this to you as well. One of your all-time favorite games, or one that's really meaningful to you?
Yeah, as she said, a difficult question, but I would say Mass Effect has to be mine. Mass Effect 2 mainly has to be mine. Mass Effect 1 is really good, but Mass Effect 2 was like a whole another level. And those characters, meeting them, like Thane, I think his name is, for the first time, he's so cool. You're like, oh my God, this assassin in a sunlit room. And then he's got he's an absent father and he's got a respiratory illness. I'm like, what? This is insane. We're 3 minutes into meeting this character. He's the coolest person I've ever met. And he was just amazing. And that game itself, and Mass Effect as well, like you said, I played KOTOR before that and I loved it. But in that game, in KOTOR, I was a bad guy and I was like, I'm going to be a bad guy. I'm going to kill this person. I'm going to make this person kill this person. I was just evil as hell. But in Mass Effect, by that time, maybe it was because of the graphics, maybe because of the voice acting, or just the characterization in general, I found that I couldn't do it. Sure, I could push a bad guy out a window, no problem. But when it came to hurting good people, I just didn't like it. I didn't like doing it. And so I was like, I'm going to be a renegade, but I'm going to be good to my friends. Yeah. And so, yeah, that game was the first game where I was just like, I can't, I've got to kind of play more like my alignment, and I just can't be a jackass. So
Mass Effect 2 was your moral realignment in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a good person, damn it.
Yeah. Trust me. I played Mass Effect 2 as a paragon. Come on.
Well, yeah, I did some questionable things, but yeah. I stand by all my choices in that game in the end.
Yeah. Awesome. And Ciel, what about you?
So I guess the game that's kind of most meaningful to me, is actually Star Wars: The Old Republic. Another BioWare game. Mostly it's meaningful to me just because it got me into computer games. It got me really hooked on RPGs. It drew me in. I spent 2 years or something on a prog team, 3 nights a week, doing all the nightmare raiding and shit, all the timed run titles, all that stuff. And played every class story, did all of that. I can't recommend anybody play it now. Unfortunately, BioWare has kind of been tanking the game for a while now, and their most recent expansion basically just shot the entire user interface and combat system. So I don't recommend anybody play it now, and I actually unsubbed a few months ago for the first time in 7 years or something.
Wow.
But it will always hold a special place in my heart, and it introduced me to other BioWare games and other RPGs, and a bunch of other games that I wrote a lot of video game fan fiction, and that also spurred me into writing. So I don't recommend anyone play the game, but it holds a special place in my heart.
But that's kind of the crazy thing about video games, is this ever shifting landscape, and it's something that's really good. I think it happens a lot more with MMORPGs and stuff like that, and just games that are constantly evolving, as opposed to something like Horizon, which is a pretty established game, and then updates will fix bugs and things along those lines. But yeah, see, I mean, that's really cool, but at the same time, it's it must be such a heartbreak to be like, oh, they fucked this game up. What did they do to it?
It really was like months before the expansion came out, they put everything on the PTS and stuff.
Mhm.
And I had friends who were like, so they made some changes. And every change they told me about, every change that was announced, I was like, oh, this is bad. The devs don't know how to play their own game. And I went on to the official forums, and the official forums were filled with people being like, no,
Yeah.
don't do this. Really, don't do this. And the devs' response would be like, cool, we're going to ignore you. And I was like, oh, I don't want to play this game if the devs are just going to be constantly shitty to their players on the official forums. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to give them money if that's the case.
Yeah, but I mean
So-
that's kind of that's like the player developer relationship there is like, you know,
Yep.
Austin will get a little bit of an insight into the dev side of things, but it's like these are the people that are playing your game, so I think it's really important to listen to what they're saying. You know, obviously be pragmatic about it, but it's like make your games an enjoyment to play, because especially with something like the Old Republic where people are I don't know if it's like you pay a one-time fee or if you have a monthly subscription, right?
It's monthly subscription. You
Yeah.
can do free to play, but they do kind of screw over players. Like if you do free to play, you can't really do much.
You can't even hide
And
your
it's
helmet.
really limited. Yeah, you can't.
It's the most
which
evil
is
thing
a necessity
anyone has ever
for all
done.
video games. You have to make your helmet invisible. It's the number one important
yeah.
thing in video games. Yeah, they definitely in the past few years, it definitely felt like they were trying to, you know, wring money out of their players as well.
Yeah. Well, that's a bummer. I mean, I'm happy that it holds a special place in your heart, but it kind of sucks to be like this amazing thing is just kind of shit the bed. But
Yeah. I still love it. Don't play it. Viewers out there, don't give it money. Watch like YouTube playthroughs.
Or like the cinematics are amazing. So watch the cinematics.
The cinematics are great. Watch video game playthroughs of a light side Sith warrior and a dark side Imperial agent. Those are the two best classes. If you want to watch Luke Skywalker shit, light side Jedi Knight, but it is a tiny bit boring. Don't watch the Trooper storyline. It's so dull.
Troopers are always dull in the movies anyway, so.
They really are.
And,
okay, not the Clone Wars TV show.
That's true. Yeah, caveat.
Yes.
And Austin, I'll toss it to you, one of your favorite or more meaningful gaming experiences.
Well, yeah, lots of options, as everyone has said. I'm going to give the shout out to Dwarf Fortress, a less well-known indie game, for two reasons. It's about your colony of dwarves and you're mining downward for valuable metals and trying to maintain your colony and cope with problems like your mine floods or you uncover some horrible beast that you shouldn't have. I mean, you are the dwarves of Moria, right? You dig too deep. I like it for two reasons. One is because it's deeply simulation-y and systems driven, which means, you know, it's a dynamically running simulation and it throws problems at you and you have to invent your own solutions to those things, and everything about the world you're living in is uniquely generated, which means your experience is uniquely your own, and your story is uniquely your own, and it feels like that you are the only person ever to delve this mine. You are not running along a track, and every game is like is somewhere on the spectrum between a linear authored narrative and a systems driven abstraction, but and Dwarf Fortress is very far over on one end. There's that, and there's also just the mood of it, that sort of doomful sense that the dwarves are living out an existence of avarice that will be their downfall because you will delve too deep. I mean, maybe your dwarves will just die of starvation before you get there, but eventually you will uncover something horrible that will start coming back up your mind and devouring your dwarves. That's profound sense of somewhere in the deep darkness. There is something wrong. It's a mood that is, I don't know if it's ever been equaled in games.
It's like at the same time as you're delving deep into the minds themselves, you're also delving deep into the human psyche.
Yeah, and and your dwarves have their own personalities and they're reacting to things,
so cool.
And the metals are getting so valuable, but you know at some point you're going to break through into the wrong place.
There's a Balrog down there somewhere. That's awesome. I've never heard of that game before, but it's like I really want to check it out.
It's an indie game.
You sold me
it's
on
hard.
it. Yeah.
It's hard to recommend because it is fiendishly complicated, but it is
Mm.
quite rewarding as well.
Yeah. And Ron, what about you? What one of your favorite gaming experiences?
I feel like I need to say something that's narrative driven, like Red Dead 2, or just because of the emotions that hit
Mm,
as I played through the end of it. But I'm gonna have to kind of go with what Austin was saying for tone and go with Bloodborne.
nice.
Partly because atmospherically, like I still haven't come across a game that is so like I felt viscerally disturbed playing it, like freaked out, upset, unlike any other game I'd ever played before. Like if I beat the boss, I actually felt this like sickening rush of adrenaline just leave me, you know? And so atmospherically, like it's just incredible. And I think also because it kind of made me feel, it sounds a little cheesy, but it made me feel like an actual gamer for the first time because I tried it and I was like, what? This is shit. I can't do this. This is impossible, you know? And so I stopped. And then I went back in there and I slowly started getting better. And which in turn made me realize that some of the other games I'd played before, say like Horizon or something, where I was doing it kind of, I was taking the easy way through. But playing Bloodborne kind of taught me how rewarding it actually is to play something that truly challenges you. And I'm not a
Mhm.
great gamer. Like I'm awful at every From Software game there is. But I love them. Like I just adore every single one of them. I mean, I'm frustrated with Elden Ring right now, so I went back and started playing Dark Souls 3 and I'm like, I don't know why I do this to myself, but I don't know. There's something about it. And plus, honestly, despite the fact that like Bloodborne's narrative is so fucking just cryptic and weird as hell, like I don't know, I love it. It's weird enough. I found some guy on Reddit who wrote a 108-page like essay explaining the lore that he gathered from like the DLC and all the items and
Wow.
everything. Like, I mean, I read most of it. It was stunning. It was like reading a novel. It was fantastic. Then I got
Man,
some
that
of the kids at the high school where I work. I got them hooked on it too, and so now they're like, "Oh, we found it. We read it." I'm like, "That's right."
it's like I recommended that. But
Yeah.
that's awesome because it's like you touched on a couple things all of you did where, you know, masochism aside, um, sometimes people just really want to challenge themselves and video games do offer that. But I wanted to do a little bit of a narrative compare and contrast between books and video games. What is unique about the video game format, and what advantages does it have over a format like novels? And Ron, you just touched on one thing, which is the challenge of it. It's like you can cater the challenge to yourself, and this is something for me that I think video games are really good at, because you can coast through it if you're the kind of person who's more like, I want to focus on the narrative or what have you. And then there are other games which are really cerebral, Austin, which you mentioned with Dwarf Fortress, where it's like very systems driven. But I think the flexibility that video games offer for me is one of those things where it's like, in addition to the storytelling options that it has for developers to then give to players, the ability to then fine tune things and cater it to yourself, for me, is just amazing kind of thing. It's like, I'm just going to up the difficulty because I want a little bit more of a challenge. And then Ron, for you to feel like a gamer finally because you had that challenge, and the From Software games are very challenging, but at the same time you're just like, man, that satisfaction that you get when you just overcome that.
Well, and it is, and having done that, and finally like realizing I could play it, going back because I had attempted Dark Souls 3 the first, like that was my first experience because it was like $20 on a sale rack when I got my
Mhm.
PS4. So I was like, I don't know what this game is. This looks cool. Let's try it. And within 5 minutes, I was like, no, I'm out. I can't do this. But I realized I was approaching it kind of in a wrong way. So
Mhm.
having played other games since then and going back to it now, I'm like, okay, this is tough, but it's not like nearly as daunting,
Yeah.
as I thought it was.
Yeah.
So that was
And
kind of cool to circle back.
and Ron, for you personally, like what's something about the video game format that is really unique to you, or some sort of advantage that it has over other narrative storytelling formats?
Honestly, I mean, I think it's a combination of the immersiveness, and the fact that you are actually like, people talk about feeling like they're the main character in a book and relating to that person, but like I always, as much as I can immerse myself in a book, there's always a sense of detachment because I'm doing this thing, which sounds weird because I'm about to compare it to video games and I'm holding a controller. But I don't know, the fact that I'm directing the action and the things that are happening because of what I did, especially in games that have branching narratives and everything you do, like you guys was like in Mass, because I've only played Mass Effect 1, but just knowing that there are different outcomes out there and that literally 100 people could have a completely different experience playing that. Like, it's just, that's astounding to me. Honestly, like, I will never give up books, but if I had to go with like the medium of the future, the top tier, like everything is there, it's got to be games.
Yeah, I'm on the same page.
Which I write books, but hey,
put yourself out of business. It's fine.
Exactly. Already, like one book and I'm done. I'm just gonna play games now.
Debut and that's it, baby. And Jenny, what about you? What is sort of a unique aspect of video games, something that it has advantage over other mediums?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't really see it as an advantage so much as just something that is different. Like, it's a different way of experiencing a story. Like, one of my favorite things to do when I'm just kind of blocked on writing and over it is just to go play a game. And even if it's in the same genre, it just works a different part of my brain than a novel does. Definitely perspective is something that, as I'm starting to write video games, I'm grappling with, and, I'm learning a lot from Casey, thankfully, but it's complicated because it's like in a book, you want to have your readers connect to your characters. Whereas in a video game, you want the same thing, but they're going to be one of those characters. So it adds a layer of complication. They're bringing a lot more of their experience and expectations to the experience of the game. So you got to kind of account for that. And some of that is, kind of feels like you're kind of just washing the characters, making them really neutral, but you still need them to have personalities. So it's like really complicated in that way, depending on the kind of, how narrative you're making your game. So I think, again, it's not really something where I think it has like a major advantage other than that, you get to be immersed in the world a little more because there's a visual aspect to it. So that's kind of a different thing. Whereas it's kind of like with films, you can't write the internal thoughts, whereas in a book, it's a lot easier to include internal thoughts. So there's just some kind of give and take there as far as immersion.
Yeah, that's true. It's like you got to make it kind of like vanilla character so that it acts as like an avatar for, obviously avatar is a very common term in video games, but it's like, it makes sense because you have to present this like shell of a character, and a lot of the times allow people to kind of use their own personality and their own agency to craft that into something else, And I'll toss this to Nick too, Mr. Morally Gray. I don't want to kill good people. For you, what is unique about video game as like a narrative medium?
I think that it's just, like immersion obviously is the big thing, and probably like what really, really sets it apart. Obviously things like as video games get more advanced, like the voice acting obviously plays a huge role because you get those performances that maybe a book can't quite deliver. But I would say music and sound is like its biggest advantage because it's such a huge part of your experience about anything. Like think about how, if someone loves Star Wars, like a huge part of why they love Star Wars is that music, is those sounds. And so when you
get the Wilhelm scream, of course.
Classic. Yeah, it can ruin a thing too.
Exactly.
But yeah, like I think just when you get musical score added to like that immersion and excitement, like in Ciel will know this, playing Final Fantasy 14, like I don't know how far you've gotten it, but there's like
the music so good.
It's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Oh, I've gotten through the whole thing. I'm actually on my replay. I'm about to hit Endwalker on my replay.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I know everything. You can spoil whatever.
Well,
the hell
I'm not going to spoil it for anyone like watching. Yeah, but I mean, in the Shadowbringers expansion, like, and some of just these fights are just so epic. Like, it's epic like I've never ever experienced in any game, any book, any movie. Nothing comes remotely even close. Like every Final Fantasy is pretty much about fighting God in the end, and in Final Fantasy 14, you fight him like 18,000 times. And it's the music, I think, is a huge, huge leg up for video games.
Yeah, I completely agree. And sometimes it's like the Mass Effect 1 soundtrack, that for me was like, holy shit. Because that was the first time I ever actually bought a video game soundtrack. because I'm like, I love this
Really?
so much. Yeah, like the synth, just like that synth soundtrack was like so beautiful and so atmospheric. And I think it was the first trailer for that game. The music that they actually soundtracked the trailer with was what got me. And I was just like, whoa, this is really like just like ambient mix of sort of like galactic epicness. And I'm like, oh man, I need to play this game. And then I followed all the trailers just obsessively. And then when it finally came out, I was like, yeah, I got to buy this soundtrack because it's really, really good. Yeah. And Ciel, what about you? Something that you think is very unique about the video game format?
I think, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm like everything everyone else has said. I think for me, there's something very technically interesting about the way you can make choices in an RPG. And obviously, like some BioWare games, right, you can really direct the story to like a much more intense degree because you have those branching narratives. But even in games like Final Fantasy XIV, you can't change the narrative, but you get the opportunity for enough dialogue lines and such that it still feels like you as a character have a personality. So I feel like that for me is sort of the most important thing, I guess, is being able to feel like, like you have some kind of direction, some kind of input, even if it's really small, and you kind of can't get that with books. Also, music slaps. I definitely haven't listened to the Endwalker trailer music on repeat for like 5 hours straight. Definitely never did that.
Just saying. Yeah, but I think there is like a genre that has sort of popped up and is gaining a lot of momentum. Is called lit RPG, like literary RPGs. So I think that is kind of taking what you said, Ciel, of this this input that you infuse throughout the experience to make it feel like more engaging, like you actually have some say in the direction of the narrative. I haven't delved into lit RPGs myself, but you know, it's really interesting that I think that's a very clear example of how video games are just kind of like morphing into this literary subgenre, which is really, really cool. And Austin, I'll get your take on the advantages or unique aspects of video games.
Yes, well, very hard to add to what people have said. It's been argued that that the one distinctive thing about video games that nothing else has is, of course, agency on the part of the spectator or player. Even the idea of touching a fictional world that responds and changes, even if it's just a linear story and you're participating in it, or even just triggering the next phase of it. Everything else in video games, you can find it in other media, but that one you can't, and it gives you that sense that you own your experience in a slightly different way. Most games is a sense that you're following a narrative, but you are also creating it at the same time. There's a sense that you're collaborating with a system to create a unique experience. That's, as has been said before, that's the thing that formally you can point to.
Yeah, and Austin, conversely, I'll let you go first on this one. Just comparison between video games and novels. What's something about the novel format that might be like a unique advantage over something like video games?
Well, I mean, you can point to a couple of things, and I think there may not be too much original to say here. Obviously, engaging the imagination exclusively through language is interesting. You have a limited tool, yet that is in some way unlimited, right? It is some shades of meaning. Language has rhythm, right? It has its own music. The confinement to language that a novel has is in some way really, really powerful.
Yeah.
It somehow magnifies the beauty of that one tool. And of course, as we all know, language is for some reason kind of infinitely flexible and infinitely capable of creative meaning. And also, it provides psychology, right? You are always that's one of its signal abilities, right? You narrate the thoughts of characters, of a central character, in a way that you don't always do, that you seldom do in video games, because as has been said, even a character like Lara Croft is in some sense a shell, right, for the player's own psychology.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I think, yeah, the psychology aspect is fascinating because it plays into your imagination, but it also plays into your own personality. And then, I've heard many authors talk about how um, a reader will, talk to them on Twitter or send them an email or something like that, or they'll talk in person and they'll just be like, this is like my perception of this character, and be like, that's not at all like how I described that character, how I imagined them when I was writing them, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that someone can use their own imagination and their own psychology to manipulate the words that are on a page and translate that into their brain is something that feels immensely personal to them, but has nothing or has like a little strand of commonality between what the author actually created and then what that person interpreted it as.
Yes, that was the
Um,
surprise of meeting readers. Like you feel as if you have absolute control, but then you
mhm.
realize that the novel is entirely interactive in its own way.
Yeah, yeah, super cool. And Jenny, what about you?
Yeah, it's a great point. I definitely agree with what you guys are saying. I think the main difference for me that I've been noticing as I start, writing games too, is the collaboration aspect. When I was making films, it was very collaborative. There's still usually a writer or just a couple of writers, but it's still what the end product isn't going to match the script. And there's a
Mhm.
similar thing going on in gaming, obviously, and you're a little more, I don't want to say encumbered, but like limited by the medium, in that you could write this epic scene and then the devs are going to be like, there's no way we can do this for this reason, this reason, and this reason. So then you're rewriting the entire thing, so you kind of have to like take that into consideration as you're writing for a game, whereas with a novel it can be whatever you want basically. And yeah, if your
Infinite.
publisher is like, this is like too offensive or whatever, you might have to change things or whatever. But like for the most part, you are steering that ship, and whatever you write is what's going to hit the reader's eyes or ears if they listen. Versus with a video game, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, like way more than I even ever thought. Um, that can change that course.
Yeah, it's like each medium has their own system, but like Austin said, it's like the system of language is much more flexible in that sense. Whereas like video game systems, there's a lot more confinement in terms of what processing power is capable of, graphics cards and all that kind of stuff, or what like a developer has in terms of the tools they're using, like the graphics engine and that kind of thing. So it's really, we'll get a little bit more into the video game dev side of things afterwards, but I think it must be crazy to just witness like, oh shit, there's a lot more barriers than I thought, especially coming from writing novels.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ron, I'll toss it to you as well. Something that is unique and advantageous about novels.
I mean, honestly, I think the biggest thing is probably, as much as games are immersive, I think the books are always going to be slightly more immersive, partly because, especially more so with first person and third person, but how like privy you are to the character's thoughts, main character, side characters, what have you. But also your imagination as a reader, you're not being fed all that sensory input from the game like with a movie or a game or whatever. Like they're giving you the visuals and the sounds, and so they're keying these emotions, and
Hmm.
you're responding to them because they want you to, and it works and it's great. But with the book, you like all of that is internal for you as the reader. The atmosphere in the book could affect someone, two people completely, just like in the game it could affect people differently, I guess. But like it's all in your head, it's all internal, and so I don't know if a game ever will quite get that immersive, if that makes sense.
Maybe once we start
Maybe
getting
with
deeper into
VR,
VR
yeah,
and
like
AR.
I
Yeah.
but yeah, I think for me that those two things have to be it. I mean,
Yeah, the internality is a big thing for me because I
yeah.
think a story, like a written work, just has that ability to really dive deep, haha, into a character's uh, psyche, their emotions, and how they directly react to something. Whereas a lot of video games, it's like you're interpreting the reaction based on what you're experiencing on like a visual, auditory gameplay level. And Ciel, what about you? Something that is really advantageous or unique about novels in comparison to video games?
I feel like it is kind of two things. I think the first one is the interiority of characters, and just being able to read like their internal monologue, not only what they're thinking, but like I write third person, limited point of view, and one of my favorite things to do is change sort of the voice of each character depending on whether or not it's their point of view. So I feel like being able to write not just like she thought this or whatever, but like their own internal way of speaking, like what their personal tone is, and how that can kind of contribute. Like, are they using more formal language? Are they swearing a lot? Like that kind of stuff. Like just little bits that can give you like the tone of of how a character thinks. And I also do I do think like the fact that as a writer you don't have to deal with like I don't know a VFX budget or something. So like if I'm writing Star Wars fan fiction, I can be like, anyway, that person was flying 20 feet in the air and shooting lightning out of their hands, and somebody else is throwing rocks and like there's guns everywhere or whatever. Like I can write whatever the hell I want, and I don't have to think about like budget or what a game engine can do or anything like that. And I don't know. I like doing that. I love fight scenes.
And yeah, I mean that's a big thing because like, Jenny, you mentioned sort of like the barriers of scripts and stuff like that, but then at the same time it's like the gameplay itself has so many barriers. It's like whatever you can imagine in your head or write down on a page in terms of like a Jedi lightsaber battle is way cooler than anything they can ever pull off in a movie or a video game or what have you, because it's like, this system has much more leeway to go off the rails, and there's no, limiting capacity as to what we can imagine. And that's why you look at the lightsaber battles from the original trilogy compared to the newer films, and you're just like, oh man, it's like you go from like this to like, oh shit, Yoda can do backflips, and that's really cool. And things just get way more complicated from there based on what we have available in terms of VFX budget or graphic systems and all that kind of stuff. Nick,
yeah, but without the sound of the lightsabers, is it really a lightsaber fight?
You can make the sounds in your head.
Well, you can describe the sound of lightsabers.
Can you?
Yeah,
I would love to see the word. I'm not saying you can't.
So much Star Wars fan fiction. I can. Yes, I will die on that.
Ciel has like 15 synonyms for lightsaber sounds.
I'm not saying you can't.
Oh yeah.
They're the same synonyms I use for dying cat sounds, but
yes.
Wow.
Nick, what about you? Sort of your take on novels and what they have over other mediums.
Well, I'll admit that if you'd asked me first, I would have said none, and the video games are far superior in every way. But everyone has raised some really valid points. No, really valid points. Like every single one of you. The beauty of language, obviously, is something that it's at least right now more prevalent in novels. There is something to be said for like the cadence of a paragraph, word choice, and things like that. But at the same time, I don't think these are things that video games are incapable of. I just think they maybe haven't got there yet. Like I definitely have yet to read. There's some really well written video games, but I haven't read any that are as good as the best books, writing wise. But they'll get there. More and more, I think the video games are like these studios are hiring, writers, putting a bit more effort into it than they used to, and so I guess really, the only thing right now is like it depends on the scope of things, because you can write literally anything, and that will always be hampered by the real life technical issues of budgets. So,
and do you think, Nick, that sort of the video game and literary storytelling have the way that they've progressed in recent years? Obviously, like the progression of literature has been a much longer process, and video games have, like you said, caught up to a certain degree, but there's still more way to go. But do you feel like the dialogue between the two mediums kind of encourages writers and video game developers to experiment with the way that they're telling stories?
I think so, and I think you just and hopefully you will continue to see like better feedback when games are really well written. It's like, or translation is better done. Like Final Fantasy 14, it has some really, really great writing in it. Later on in the series, but it gets a lot better than it is in the kind of the beginning. And obviously games like Mass Effect or Horizon Zero Dawn or The Last of Us have, pretty incredible writing. So yeah, I think they're kind of, they'll surpass or equal books eventually. You're never going to get quite the visual cadence, but
yeah, that's true. Does anyone else have anything to add to that, and sort of the dialogue between the two storytelling methods and how they kind of encourage experimentation, or in the case of video games, like how they might eventually match up to written work?
Well, one of the reasons you haven't seen that great writing in video games, well, partly because it's not prioritized, and partly because it's very hard. It's very hard. Every medium uses language differently, and language is just not the main show in video games, and you have to figure out how to sort of loft it in and not intrude on the player's own idea of their consciousness, and not obviously write long cutscenes that you can't skip, and all that sort of things. Video games are so much about space and motion, and you have to write and convey your meaning without getting in the way of that. So I mean, yeah, like I said, video games exist side by side with novels. Neither one will displace the other.
Yeah. Anyone else?
It's kind of a. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay.
Jenny first, and then we'll come back to Ron.
Random practical thought, but I'm guessing will always be more readers than video game players, so that's something to think about as far as like you can kind of reach a wider audience with your novel writing typically.
Is that true even now?
I don't know. Video games sell quite a lot in a lot of cases. Yeah.
I'm thinking more in terms of like sci-fi fantasy, like maybe not, because that overlaps a lot, but other genres, like I know plenty of people who would read a certain book, but if it was a video game, wouldn't touch it. Like they don't want anything to do with video games. I think it's just part of like the circles I run in, like are all video game people. So it's, you sometimes have to remind yourself there are other people out there that, that don't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think also from a really practical point of view, this might just be because I'm a college student. There are tons of people I know who could afford a book but couldn't afford a console or a computer good enough to run a game.
True.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a reasonably successful book that will sell 20 or 40 or 50,000 copies. That's an absolute failure for a video game. If you're under 1 million, you're thinking about whether to close up shop.
Yeah, that's true. And Ron, what were you going to say?
Okay, let's see if I can remember the first point in a minute. But I think it's interesting because, like you were talking about the environments that you're in terms of readers versus gamers. Because my wife's a teacher and I substitute at the school, so I'm around the kids a lot. And without fail, I would say the vast majority of them I would consider gamers and not readers at all. It's a complete flip of that. And maybe it's just being the teenagers, and we don't like reading. Reading's dumb. But but without fail, it's guaranteed that I can go into a classroom and have a conversation with most of the class about some aspect of game. Yeah. But if I were to bring up books, whether classics that they have to read or current, books that I'm into or that I think they might like, there are readers there for sure, but it's less likely that I'll be able to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, that's true. I have a friend who's a teacher as well, and she's, just like the relatability of certain things, like video game, there's a lot more relatability because just maybe it's a generational thing. I'm not sure, because it's even like a generation below, like Ciel, for instance, where, who knows what their storytelling preferences necessarily are, and something like books, it's like, oh, that's fucking antiquated, like I don't want to do that. And if I am reading a book, it's on my Kindle or my iPad or on my phone, even, like crazy.
If I pull out an actual like physical book, they're just like, especially if it's like a tome.
What is that smell?
Yeah,
I cannot relate to that. I hate Kindle. I hate reading on my phone.
100%.
I only read physical books. The one exception is AO3, which is designed to be read on your phone between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m.
That's very
That's
specific.
the exception.
Don't get me wrong. I would rather live in the world where readers outnumber video game
Yes.
players, and I hope I still do.
But who knows what's going to happen
Yeah.
in like the next 5-10 years, whatever. Yeah.
Well, and it's weird because talking about involving language in games, this is probably going to sound terrible, but like take Skyrim, as I'm playing through it, as I find a book, I don't read it. I can't stand playing it.
I can't do that either.
Like in at a certain point, even with say like Horizon, I stopped reading all the data points, and I realize I'm losing a lot of story that way. And especially in a game like Elden Ring, where they bury so much of the lore inside all of the item descriptions, and I'm like, I can't. Like, I want to keep playing. Partly, it's tough to read off the TV or the screen. But yeah, partly I don't know what it is, because obviously, like, I love reading, I love words, but the second they're on a screen like that, something shuts down.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like the second it becomes meta, I'm just like, I'm out. I can't read a thing within a thing. It's like, no.
That's what you learn writing for video games. You have to be very careful about how you deploy language, because the pull in video games of that sense of motion, which is just what video games do so well, is going to pull you away. The first time you start clicking through your own writing in a video game, you realize you're just not working in the same medium.
Exactly. Yeah. And, on this whole topic of storytelling and everything like that, I want to dig into each of your works a little bit more. Ciel, Nick, and Jenny, each of you have, books that are more directly sort of like inspired by video games, as opposed to having them more like embedded within the narrative, that kind of thing. So for each of you, I'll start with Ciel. What was this sort of like creative feedback loop between your writing and the video games that you're playing? And then how did that feed into Bluebird?
I think probably the biggest video game inspiration for Bluebird was Destiny 2. There's a really cool vibe to Destiny 2 where a lot of the because it's set in our solar system, and a lot of places you go to are kind of like relics of a golden age. Like there's a sense of like you're in a post utopia, like stuff used to be better and now you're dealing with a world that's not so much. But there's also like a really cool sci-fi aesthetic to it, and there's a lot of fun to it. And I feel like for me that was a really big inspiration for Bluebird. Mostly the aesthetic, sort of the understanding that there's kind of some nostalgia for how things were in the past. Like in Bluebird, the main character Rig, her people have kind of lost everything. Like they're a lot of them are refugees. Most of them are living on like a colonized planet, and there's definitely that kind of like what their culture used to be like. There's kind of elements of that. So yeah, Destiny 2, big inspiration. I love it. I put a couple little tiny Easter eggs in my book. Nobody's noticed them, which is good. But
you've done too well.
Yeah, they're in there.
That's really cool, though. I mean, the Easter egg thing is really fascinating for me, Nick. I know you have a ton of Easter eggs, even for Dumb and Dumber, in the band series. But Ciel, beyond like the inspiration thing, do you feel like there's like playing games as like a hobby, as something that you love doing, do you feel like it adds creative fuel to your writing process?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a very visual person. Part of that is because I have a background in art. I went to an art high school. I've been doing art since I was like, I don't know, 12 or something. I've had all the professional training in digital and traditional art. And, video games are really strongly visual. And there's something about being able to write visually and write when I write, I imagine like, what would this scene look like in a movie? What would this scene look like in a video game? Like, are there lens flares? What's the camera angle? What's the mood lighting? What's the music?
That's some Mass Effect influence right there with lens flare.
like that really influences how I write. Like, there's so many scenes that I've written where it's like, you know, I can imagine it playing out in my head like a game.
Yeah. No, that's a similar thing for me too. Although there's a much less lens flare in my case, but yeah, totally. It's like visualizing that stuff and kind of like interpreting it. And a lot of the times it's like I'll have a scene in my head that is so richly detailed just there. And then it's kind of like this exercise in translation as I try to put that on the page and interpret it in a way that sort of matches up with what's in my head. And Nick, for you, what's that creative feedback loop like between video games and writing? And then what sort of inspiration, Easter eggs and that kind of things do you pull from the games that you're playing?
Well, yeah, video games are a huge, probably the biggest inspiration for me. Like I adore them more than I adore anything else in the whole world. Like, and especially just like, like a vista you come across, the art direction, like the size of the scale of things, is just, yeah, stunning to me. I just love it. And for at least with my own writing and my own books, I kind of take from a game like Final Fantasy where it's like anything can happen and the bigger the better, and not feeling restricted to, say, like if you're writing in a medieval setting, to medieval things. Like Final Fantasy obviously kind of mashes sci-fi and fantasy. And so I remember, and you might have heard this story before, I might have told you before, but when I first had an agent interested in it, he and I butted heads about the airships, because I have airships in a fantasy setting. And he's like, this is steampunk. I'm like, no, it's fantasy. And I'm like, they don't run on Steam, so they're not steampunk. And as you also may have heard me say, he suggested changing them to giant eagles. And
this isn't fucking Lord of the Rings, man.
Yeah.
Get it out of your head.
And so we parted ways shortly thereafter. But yeah, so my book's got everything and anything that I think is cool or wonderful or interesting or fun. And yeah, there is a few Final Fantasy related Easter eggs amongst all the other music and movie references in there.
Yeah, you got a lot of Easter eggs in your books, dude.
Too many, perhaps some would say.
Is there like a subreddit for all the Easter eggs in your?
I've seen some people try to compile on Reddit like all the music references.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I would say it's almost impossible, only because I forgot them too. Like I didn't really know them to begin with, and I put them in, and I'd forget them too. But yeah, it's nice. And my favorite reference of all of them, it's not video game related, but it's a Say Anything reference. The movie Say Anything. It's so deeply entrenched that like only like 2 people have ever been like, hey, I get that.
And then
it's not someone holding a ghetto blaster over their head.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's like the intention is the same.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. And Jenny, what about you? This sort of like creative feedback loop and how your video gaming influences or fuels your writing.
Yeah, so obviously before I was talking about how fan fiction kind of launched me in it, so that's a big one for me. But I guess with The Last Watch, my debut, obviously it is inspired by Mass Effect, but I didn't go into it realizing that. It had been many years since I had finished the trilogy, and it's always kind of in the back of my mind, but I hadn't played it recently or anything. And really Battlestar Galactica was the main thing where I was like, I want to make it like that, kind of. And then, I started having my critique partners go through it, and they were like, one of them's a huge Mass Effect fan, and he was like, oh man, this, and this. I was like, that's the thing I'm doing, huh?
Just subconsciously.
Yep. Like literally subconsciously, like it is just seeped into my very being. It is just part of who I am now. So it's like, that's going to be in all my books probably. And hopefully you like it, because it's going to be there. But yeah, as far as like, the mechanics of writing, it is something where I will try to go play a game if I'm kind of stuck. It helps jar me out of things, it's just kind of a different experience. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because now that I'm writing, I don't have time to play video games. So
you're writing for a video game and it just took away your time.
Yeah.
The solution is don't sleep.
Yeah.
That's the solution. Just
I need
never
sleep though. I'm like a 7.5 or I will be useless the next day type person. So.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. Unless I pull an all-nighter, and then I am so productive. Like super, super productive.
But you can only sustain that for so long.
Yeah, you can only really do that a couple times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so obviously, they're just kind of ingrained in me, and as I get time to play more, that will happen too. And yeah, they're just, like Nicholas was saying, just the best thing.
Yeah, I agree. And Ron, you actually centered your novel deep dive around a video game. So can you delve into that a little bit? Explain why you chose a game as sort of like the narrative core concept?
Um, I I think it's two reasons. One, when I wrote the book, I was in a weird, frustrating place with the fact that I've been writing for a long time and it hadn't been published, and so I kind of funneled that into the themes in the book.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember watching a documentary on God of War, um, called Raising Kratos, and there was a part when Corey Barlog's talking about being the dad and a husband and dealing with working a lot and
Hmm.
losing time with the family for the sake of having putting out this game, and that resonated a lot. I mean, I don't think I put as much time into my books as he probably has into his games, but like I understood the frustration and the pain that came with that, and it fed right into what I was trying to do. Um, and then I'd always had the why the story was happening in my book in my head from the beginning, and I was trying to figure out the best, I guess, medium for that to take place in.
Hmm.
And so when I landed on games and specifically using a VR unit, as soon as I figured that out, I was like, okay, the ending, as weird as it may be, makes sense within the context of a VR system,
Yeah,
right? Whether I pulled it off, I mean, who
you
knows?
did.
But thank you. But yeah, so once I had those two things, for sure, like, and I think also because I was playing through God of War, I was like, I want to create something like this story,
Right.
this experience. And obviously my book is nothing like God of War at all. Um, but there was just something about the narrative in that story that I was like, that I hadn't felt reading other books for a long time. But when I
Yeah.
played through the game and got to the end of it, I was like, I want to do that, but with a book,
Yeah,
you
like
know?
hit those like obviously you're crafting your own narrative and it's a reflection of you as opposed to the game
Right.
being a reflection of other creators, but
Yeah.
it's like you want to hit like sort of like these emotional points that are uh reflective of what you've created, and that's sort of
Right.
like that just that insane like resonance that you can get with certain
Yeah.
things. And I think that like emotional resonance is a really powerful thing that I think video games nail and books also nail. And it's kind
Yeah.
of like this unifying factor of being able to empathize with whatever is going on and
Right.
then just be like, oh shit, sit back
Yeah.
from your book or sit back from the screen or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for you, what was it like getting into video games 5 years ago and then actually trying to imagine like a fictional video game that you actually put into your book?
I mean, so I think I skirted it a little bit. Um, I mean, I definitely there's references in the book to the games that the main character has made that have
Mhm.
brought him to the point where he's at when the story starts.
Yeah.
Um, but I definitely, I don't know. I didn't approach it thinking I'm writing a video game story, right? I guess um I was definitely approaching it like I'm writing a novel. I'm writing, from this guy's point of view and his
Mhm.
experiences. Um I don't know. Yeah, I actually I do, now that you asked me that, I do feel like I kind of avoided writing that like the book is a game, even though
Yeah.
I have games in the book that don't exist, you
Yeah,
know?
and I mean,
Um
yeah, you mentioned to me like the book that you're working on now is like, I guess, yeah, it's kind of
so
skirting that line as well
I
in
mean,
terms
well,
of
actually in some ways it's the complete opposite because I mean, I'm revising it right now, but it's a flip. Instead of it being a real world situation, it's a piece of technology that forces someone into a fictional situation, and so the bulk of the book is in that fictional fantasy world, which also is funny because as much as I adore epic fantasy and that's what I read when I started, as a teenager and fell off and got back into again, I've avoided writing epic fantasy for some reason until I decided to frame it within the context of a weird video game type simulation system. And then suddenly I was like, shit, I can write epic fantasy. This is great. But if I had set out to write an epic fantasy, I would have been too, I don't know, too overwhelmed or it was, yeah, it's weird.
it's like you need to have that like weird mental conceit of like, yeah, this is
Yeah.
epic fantasy, but within a system that it's like I
Right.
can frame it as something else.
And I like the genre mashups too. I like blending
Yeah,
technology and fantasy and that sort of thing. So
yeah, 100%. And Austin, I want to focus on a little bit on your novel You, where you center it around a video game and a video game developer. So you have this like mysterious software glitch that propels the narrative and everything that goes on in that book. But since you have experience working various video game developers, both writing and designing, can you share a little bit about that environment, what it's like to see a video game take shape from the ground up, and then sort of relate that to how you took your own personal real life experiences and infused it into that novel?
Sure. The oddity is that I'm very often asked, how writing novels and writing games interacts for me. By and large, they do not. Writing games is so intensely collaborative, and writing a novel is sort of like you're kind of try to have this stillness, and you listen to the voices that come up from the well. They're quite
Yeah.
different. With my second novel, You, and You, the title You is the You of video games, right? You are in a maze of
Yeah.
twisty passages all alike, right? The You is always the other person playing the video game, and that I was sort of approaching what video game development looks like with the sort of novelist's eye, and bringing in all the weird tensions and challenges and interpersonal weirdness of making video games.
Mhm.
And I brought in a lot of the language of video games, right? It's dropping into the second person a lot, and just realizing that there is this weird unknown other that you're addressing, the You, when you're making video games, right? Because you never know quite what the player is going to do, right?
Mhm.
You always are leaving space for what the player is going to do, right? Which is the big writing challenge of it. And anyone who makes video games knows, video game players are bastards. They will break your game. They will do everything
Ciel.
you didn't predict. They will break your system. It is a siege war
Yeah.
between you and the players
War
in
of
a very
attrition.
productive way. I love griefers. I love people who want to cheat at the games, because they're doing something entirely original that you never conceived of. But it is a bit of a trench war.
That's fascinating though. And after, I can imagine writing that book was a bit cathartic in a way, because it's like encapsulating so much of what you've personally experienced, and being able to slip in like a bit of memoir type stuff in there. But after writing that book, writing about a video game developer while also working as a video game developer, did that experience come back to inform your approach to writing for video games?
That is interesting, and I'm stopping for a little bit on it. I mean, not really, because it is so different. It is so different. Uh, you know, the state you're in when you're writing a novel, and you're so sort of collapsing all your senses into language. Uh,
Mhm.
um, I felt like I did a pretty good job of encapsulating that space, which is sort of oddly weird and unique, and felt like unmapped terrain. Uh,
Mhm.
but honestly, it's two different crafts. They're very different crafts.
And for you personally, I mean, what is it like in terms of, this difference? Like, what's different about writing a novel in comparison to writing for a video game?
Well, I mean, writing a video game is you take the light touch. Like when you're sort of constructing a player character, you're always trying to think to myself, how much room do I leave for the player? Right?
Mhm.
Do I give them a blank slate? Just the unknown camera holder of the first person, or do you give them Lara Croft? Do you give them a persona with which to live in the world, or do you do the middle ground where you give them a customizable persona? Right, you're always, like I said, in dialogue with that invisible other person that is the uh, player. Whereas you're writing the novel, yes, all your senses, all your thoughts are collapsed into that one medium of language, and you are
Mhm.
uh, uh, you and you are creating for yourself. That is so thoroughly imagined uh, by you. Um, I teach video game writing now at NYU, And it is a dash of cold water in the face. People are coming in and having entirely to rethink how they tell a story.
Yeah. Because I mean, obviously, there's like the collaborative aspect of it where you're usually working with a team, but then, from your experience, what is it like? Jenny mentioned this a little bit earlier or referenced it. You have to collaborate not only within the writing team, but you also have to collaborate with the, like the software engineers. You have to collaborate with the audio team, like the people who are recording the dialogue and all that kind of stuff. So for you, what is it like in terms of working within that writing team, but then working within the broader context of a game developer?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. Video game development teams often don't know what a writer is or how a writer works. They may
Right.
not know about first drafts and that you might want to revise at some point. It's a craft that they don't know about. So a lot of it is you teaching them what a writer does and how a writer works. Actually, there are 3 collaborations, which you rightly point out. There's collaborating with the development team, there's collaborating with the unknown player, and there's collaborating with the machine. Learning what the machine does well and poorly, its strengths and weaknesses, and learning to play to those.
Right.
It is a fascinating challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. And do you have some like a favorite memory? Because you've worked on like some really amazing games like System Shock and Dishonored and Deus Ex. Do you have like some favorite memories from those dev experiences?
I mean, I have a lot of memories that I put into the novel. I mean, the one that I remember first of all is going in and learning to use the game editor, where you're editing the whole reality, and like I put down like this animated skeleton, and then I looked at it, and the skeleton walked away from me, and I thought to myself, "Holy shit, we are in a you come back, I'm in a different space," because it was just disappearing down the corridor. And I was like, "You're not really my character."
Yeah, it's like this own living, breathing simulation. Just take it off. That's amazing. Has anybody played any of those games, or if you have any questions about like the design or writing process for Austin?
Nice work on Deus Ex. That's all I got to say. Yeah.
Thank you. That was messy, and even we were a bit surprised that it came together as well as it did.
And Ron, you look like you were going to say something.
I mean, I have Dishonored on my console. It's one of the mini games I keep. It's there. I need to play it.
Do it.
Yeah, big Cormac McCarthy fans were the creative leads on that one, and you can see it quite clearly.
Yeah,
I have
amazing.
the Dishonored tabletop RPG book, which is super cool and I like a lot, but I haven't actually got around to playing the game yet.
Oh, please do. Yeah, like Dishonored 1 and 2 are fantastic. Those are the kinds of games where it's like the combination of gameplay mechanics and player agency was very much in sync, where it's like a lot of the things that you were doing on the gameplay level with the systems in terms of like the powers that you wanted to use and all that kind of stuff really informed the narrative in an awesome way.
And it's the same. A lot of the people are the same people who made Deus Ex, right?
Mhm.
That's the same design team.
Yeah.
Sort of evolved.
Mm-hmm. And Jenny, now that you're working with Humanoid Studios, what's it been like so far? And I imagine for you, it's like we were talking over Twitter DMs. It's like it must feel pretty surreal working with Casey Hudson and his team, since he was the game director for, Mass Effect and a lot of these games that have inspired you.
Yeah, it's still surreal. It's been like 5 or 6 weeks. And yeah, it's crazy. They're all super nice and super patient. And I think what's been interesting is that I get the vibe that they are not used to having a writer on so early, like at all. So they all want me to do all the things. And it's great because I'm learning fast. And that's how I learn, is just by doing the thing. So that's been wonderful. But we're in the prototype phase, so it's just like go. Like, let's do all the things and let's rewrite this entire prototype. And I've never written that before, but I just start writing like I would write a movie script, and then we kind of work together to figure stuff out. So it's been super interesting, and I've been learning a lot really fast, and it's cool, and I'm having fun. The biggest thing for me has been like that there's no tools really for other than like get in the engine and do the thing, but like there's no good like software for writing for games. So I've just been using Word, and then I put a mind map in it for when there's branching stuff, and it's a mess. And I don't know what else to do. But if you have any advice, Austin, I would love it.
I mean, some studios have a bespoke tool that they make.
Yeah,
to
and we will
engine.
Eventually, but since we're still in the prototype phase, we don't have any of that yet. So
yes, no, well, I mean, but by and large, you're right. Mostly, I'm doing it. I've worked in Word and Excel and Final Draft, and I suppose it does reflect a little bit the low priority writers have in the industry, that they don't have dedicated tool or you work in Twine or Inkle to rough stuff out, but those are not dedicated to doing 3D games.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been definitely a learning process. Super fun. It's weird because they'll all be like, "Oh, when we made Dragon Age 2, this happened," and I'm like, "Oh." All of these people are super smart and awesome.
And now you're part of that process.
I know, somehow. But yeah, it's mostly just been like a lot of writing dialogue, which ironically overlaps with my novel writing quite well, because almost all the time when I start a scene, I'm just writing the whatever dialogues in it, and then I fill in all the novel stuff around it. So it's been very easy for me to just write the dialogue, and then you write like notes to the dev, basically. That's like, if this happens, then here's some lines. But you don't have to like write this beautiful description of the level, because art and the level designers are going to do that, and you don't have to do that. So it's just kind of fun writing banter and discovering the characters as I write stuff. And yeah, it's a fun phase for sure. I'm sure it'll get a little more intense once we're actually in production, but for now, it's just having fun.
That's awesome, though. It's kind of like just trial by fire and
yep.
Let it happens. And I imagine there's a lot in video games. Austin, I don't know if your experience is like this too, where there's a lot of just trial by fire kind of thing, where things are just hectic for a while and everyone's sort of like fitting the pieces together.
Sure. And you're doing a job that the other people in the team don't know how to do. Yeah. So they can't tell you how to do it. You are learning for yourself.
Yep.
Figure it out, Jenny.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how this goes, though. And, there's one more thing that I wanted to touch on just for a little bit, which is adaptations. There are so many examples of video games based on books, whether it's like the Witcher series, Stalker, the Metro series, Tom Clancy games, that kind of thing, as well as video games being expanded upon with companion novels. Halo, Dishonored also has companion novels, Mass Effect, Gears of War, Assassin's Creed, all these different series. So I'll toss this to you first, Nick. From your perspective, what are some of the advantages of adapting a video game from an existing story, in terms of, if you've read, for instance, like the Witcher novels, I read those, and then comparing that to my experience playing The Witcher 3 is a drastically different experience.
Well, I definitely don't have much expertise on this whatsoever. But I would say, like, you just got a huger wealth of world building to rely upon and start building off of. And that would probably help inform, obviously, the writing and also like the art department and things like that. Maybe not the gameplay, but yeah.
And Austin, if you, I mean, I don't think any of the games that you've made have been adapted from anything, but if you have any take on that as well.
Well, there's a kind of holy grail of video game adaptation that I assign to my students, which is Jane Austen, which is Pride and Prejudice. How would you adapt that into a video game? It's a fascinating challenge, and it does it shows and pushes up against the limits of the video game medium. And I am absolutely sure we will do it. But it is a real challenge for the medium that we are waiting to see breakthrough.
Just everyone's waiting. Yeah, man. I think a dating sim of Pride and Prejudice would actually be kind of interesting.
I mean, I think a dating sim of pretty much anything would be, fun.
Kings of the Wild dating
Lord of the
sim?
Rings dating sim.
Yeah.
Get Samwise and Frodo together. That's
At last. At last.
Has anyone else played any video game adaptations, but also read some of the books?
I started to read some of the Witcher short stories, and I haven't finished Witcher 3. I've played a good portion of it. But yeah, it was weird playing the game and then going to read the stories. And I can see where they drew from for the game. And then of course watching the show, it's like all three of these things are like muddled in my head now.
Yeah.
But I think it was like Nick was saying, like, I think if you're adapting maybe a book into a game, you can draw from the world building, the descriptions, and the dialogue, particularly. Those two things would be the most helpful in taking a book into a game format. Obviously, being like you were saying, Jenny, the idea that like you can write the scene and the devs are like, yeah, we can't ever pull that off. You got to tone it back down.
Yeah.
But having that building block to start from, I think, would be super, is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to think. You guys were talking about like Jane Austen. Like it's maybe there's not a great connection here, but I was thinking of What Remains of Edith Finch. And that sort of narrative game where it's a slower, very narrative driven, almost no input from you as the player, and yet by the time you're done with it, you're just as floored as you are with the game you put 120 hours into that has a strong driving narrative and amazing combat and everything else.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming there are more games out there like that. I just haven't experienced, a lot of them.
I think I can't remember what the genre is called specifically. I think it's like walking simulators is essentially what it's kind of like boiled down to. But, for sure, like What Remains of Edith Finch. Firewatch is a really good one. That's like
that was good. Yeah.
A little bit more cinematic, I think, than Edith Finch. But yeah, for sure. Jenny or Ciel, do either of you have any experience with playing adaptations of books?
I haven't really played adaptations of books, but I've definitely read like books or short stories that were written as tie-in novels for video games.
Yeah, tell me about that.
I read a couple of the Star Wars: The Old Republic tie-in books. They're not good. My experience with that game is just don't play it. I love it. Don't play it.
Don't read the companion novels.
Final Fantasy 14, though, they have a ton of short stories. They're really short. Most of them are in like the, 400 to 600 word category or something. But there's a lot of them. And those I really like. I think they're a really good example of, writing what a video game can't do. You play the game from the point of view of yourself. But then it's really interesting to go and read a short story that's written from the point of view of an NPC and, really get into, into their head. Oftentimes the short stories are written set in the past. So, something you've never played through, like they'll reveal new bits of lore. And I think those are a really good way of adapting some video game material into written work.
Yeah. No, that's been my experience too. I haven't read too many companion novels. I read the Mass Effect ones, but that had the added benefit of I think the lead writer, Drew Karpyshyn, wrote Mass Effect. He wrote that whole series, but then he also wrote the companion novels, which I think a lot of the time with companion novels, they hire an outside writer, and then in a few cases, it'll be someone who worked internally on the game. And so the Mass Effect novels is like, cool. This is just a continuation of characters that I really loved, non-playable characters that I really loved. I think there was the villain in Mass Effect 1 was Saren. I can't remember the race that he was, but one of the spin-off novels, one of the companion novels was from his perspective, sort of like shaping how he became the villain that you see in the video game. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I love that. And then on top of like KOTOR, I think Drew Karpyshyn also wrote like some Star Wars novels that are no longer canon because whatever Disney bullshit is going on.
The Darth Bane trilogy.
The Darth Bane trilogy is Star Wars perfection. So Jenny, get in here. Yeah, because I know you love those books, and I know you've read a bunch of them. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but anything written by Timothy Zahn is canon forever, and nothing Disney says or does can change that.
No, but they had a weird thing where it's like Timothy Zahn wrote the original Thrawn trilogy, and then they made him rewrite it, which to me was like, why? Just republish the thing that already exists, because it's amazing.
The thing about Star Wars is there's so much of it that canon is what you make of it.
Yes.
Star Wars canon lives in your heart. And Skippy, the Force-sensitive droid, will be canon forever. No one can change my mind on that.
Oh, that's beautiful, Ciel.
Jenny, Adrian actually had a similar experience to you. I've read and Ciel, like, I don't think I've actually played any games or watched their, TV adaptations or read their books. But I have read books that are tie-in novels. Not a lot, but David Gator, the lead writer of Dragon Age, wrote a series of novels, prequel novels, some of them, and actually one of my favorite books of all time, The Stolen Throne. It's wonderful.
That's a beautiful hardcover.
And I had a very similar experience with that where, not the main character in this, but one of the main characters in this is a bad guy in Dragon Age Origins, and it completely reframes everything. And you're just like, oh, that's the thing. Like, and then you feel bad for him, and you're like, then he's your favorite character suddenly somehow. And like, it just, it gives a really cool opportunity to expand stuff that, like you were saying, just you can't do necessarily in a video game, or that a player would skip over because they're not going to sit and read, the piece of parchment that they picked up that's like 8 pages long. So you can kind of do that in a different way, which I really hope that Humanoid will let me write the tie-in novels for, for our game. That would be amazing. So we'll see. But
I think that's an easy pitch to Casey. Be like, come on, man.
He brought it up himself once, actually. He was like, maybe we'll do that someday. I was like, yes. Yes, please.
And sort of building on that, Nick, what you said about like a video game can use the world building and that kind of stuff from a novel or a series, and then adapt that with the sort of like groundwork already laid out. But I think companion novels add this really cool, like extra fabric, this extra layer of world building to a video game universe that, Jenny, like you said, some people might not be down to go into all the meta text, or some people might miss a bunch of things if it's a story that has a lot of branching narratives. And so I think like a novel is for really, really big fans, people who love the world and the aesthetic and the tone and all that kind of stuff. They can just dive into a novel and have their frame of reference for a character or what have you completely shift, which is what happened to me with Saren with Mass Effect, because I was like, okay, he's a villain, blah, 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 blah. He was an engaging villain, but the tie-in novel really changed my perspective on what I thought he was or what his motivations are and that kind of stuff. So I think it's really sort of this like effective side avenue for developers and then fans who are really invested in that universe. And on that note of adaptations, sort of like drawing this to a close, if everyone could give a recommendation for their dream, speaking of Pride and Prejudice, dream book to video game adaptation and why. And I'll start out and just say I love this series very deeply. Fonda Lee's Greenbone
God
Saga.
damn it, that was my answer, Adrian.
You can build on top of what I say, Nick. I just fucked you over. I'm sorry, buddy. But Greenbone Saga, I think, would work really well in the sense that it's like this citywide gang warfare. There's two rival factions. The narrative and world building and dialogue and characters is there. But I think looking at a game like Yakuza, which does, like third person from a gameplay perspective as well as narrative, sort of this like gangster action in a really, really cool way. And then on top of that, the Greenbone Saga has like all this amazing martial arts action that is fueled by jade magic. And so I think that's like inherently a very cool magic and combat system that you could sort of, play into some aspect of like territorial gang warfare, all that kind of stuff. So it's like, yeah, that for me would be just
good answer, buddy. Amazing. Good answer.
Go for it, Nick. Go for it. You can build on what I said.
Well, during that, I frantically thought of another one, which would be Red Rising. Almost too close to say like something like Mass Effect, but Red Rising, I think, has enough breadth of its setting. Is it goes from fantasy to sci-fi instantaneously. And I think it would make a great setting for a video game, because you could have any kind of video game, like action, like role playing, tactical, anything you could do with that. Space sim, whatever you wanted to. Yeah. So
that's a good one. I'm sorry I took Greenbone Saga.
Hey, it's a good answer. Yeah. I hope it happens. I'd play the shit out of that.
Oh hell yeah. It's like we'll boost Fonda's work as much as possible. Be like, come on, developers, get on it. And Ron, what about you? What's like your dream book to video game adaptation?
I mean, honestly, I don't even know that I'd considered that was a possibility until you guys started talking about it. But I don't know if you've ever read Ian M. Banks's Culture series.
Hell yes.
I just, as I'm sitting here thinking of books, like just the breadth of material that you could pull from. I mean, it would be like Mass Effect on LSD. Like it would just be so cool to actually live in that world. And like you were talking about, like he jumps from fantasy to sci-fi to blending the two together. Like I would spend thousands of hours playing from any number of those characters in any of those settings in any of the worlds, and just
I think the Culture series would work really well as like an MMO RPG kind of thing.
Yeah,
because it's like there's so much. It could just like, you know, kick the Old Republic to the side and take that mantle as just like there's so many different spaces that you could inhabit, but there's also like the flexibility of what people want to do from like a gameplay or like character representation level. There's just like so much going on in the Culture. I think that would be fantastic.
And the Culture series has Player of Games, which is one of the actually one of the best novels written that has a game encapsulated in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was actually the first one of those that I read. So I jumped into that, and then I think to this day it's top 2 for me of the whole series still.
Yeah, I read Consider Phlebas first, and that one was a bit
tough one.
That one was very difficult, but then I went from that to Use of Weapons, and I was like, okay, I'm into this.
Oh yeah,
like I got this. Yeah.
I would also play the hell out of a Kings of the Wild adaptation, like just because I actually just finished reading. I just finished reading it. It would be so much fun. I mean, just the slaughter alone would be so much fun to play through. Like,
yeah, here's hoping that happens too.
Right.
And Ciel, what about you? What's a dream book to video game adaptation?
I'd really love to see the like Gideon the Ninth Flocked Tomb series adapted into video games. I know it's not finished yet, but I feel like the sort of fantasy sci-fi world would be really cool. I feel like it'd be great as an MMORPG that doesn't necessarily follow the main plot of the books, but is set in the same universe.
Yeah.
And I feel like the fact that there's kind of like 8 very distinctive different kinds of necromancy in the books, I feel like that would lend itself really well to like, you know, having 8 classes in a game. Like I feel like that would be a really cool way.
Yeah, just like a heavy metal necromancy.
That's
fucking awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And Austin, what about you?
Okay, yeah, no, I'm prepared to die on this hill with the Jane Austen, partly because it is very
Pride
well
and Prejudice
structured.
For life.
Right? It has a goal. You got to marry those 5 daughters off. Even Mary, who is not making it easy.
Yeah.
You know, it is structured around the dances, and the country dances themselves are very structured, right? Because you have your dance card, and you dance twice with somebody. I really want a flirting mechanic that actually works and feels like flirting. It is there to be done. And perhaps I will do it.
I mean, the fact, now that it's on this podcast, now that you're teaching it at NYU, I feel like it's going to happen one day. You know, you have to be a part of it, though.
My wife is super into board games, and there's a game called Marrying Mr. Darcy.
Oh my god!
And like you are competing. Like the end result is it depends on like you wind up with the different men. But it's really fun to play. It's a super simple card game, but it has a lot of fun rules. You know, you can accidentally collect a card that said you ate too much meat, so you got the meat sweats and you had to leave the party early, so you lost your chance. So like it's hilarious to play. So I'm saying there's hope for a video game version if there's already a board game version.
It's happening. I can't believe meat sweats. Like that is that
may not be the phrase they use, but that's like you lost your chance at this guy because you ate too much venison.
It happens.
Yeah. See?
Yeah, Nick knows from personal
We've
experience.
We've all been there and gone nuts on the venison.
Oh, just a messy date with meat sweats. Jenny, would close out with you for dream adaptation.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me because with anything like that I love, I am afraid that they will mess it up. So it's kind of like I don't really want anything. But if I have to pick, I think Mistborn would have a really cool, expansive situation to deal with. I haven't
Jenny,
read
have
past
you
the original trilogy, but
sorry to interrupt. Have you seen the mock Mistborn? There was like I can't remember who did it exactly, but they basically like simulated what a Mistborn video game could be like with like the graphics and everything. It's like more like a cinematic thing,
yeah,
but it's really cool. You got to check
that sounds
it out.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think, the magic is so fun in that, and it is a game mechanic already. Like, you wouldn't even really have to do anything to the magic system to make it work, and yeah, I just think it'd be really fun.
Just like pop some vials of metal and you
Yep.
know. But I think
some
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I Mistborn was kind of like my backup because I was like, yeah, Greenbone Saga is more like my heart's desire, whereas Mistborn's like from a gameplay level, I think it would be really cool. And Brandon Sanderson basically writes his magic systems like a video game designer anyway, so it fits perfectly. Cool. Well, finishing off, I would like each of you to recommend a book that you've read recently and a video game that you've read recently. So, Nick, we'll start with you.
Sure. I've been recommending this for a year now, but The Black Tongue Thief is an excellent book.
That's not recently, Nick.
Well, relatively recently. There's a special edition about to come out that I was privileged enough to write the foreword for. I think it's a really hilarious book. It's immediately immersive. The language of it is just, I thought it was incredible. Like, I probably rereading it again to write this thing. I laughed out loud 3 times in the first chapter, like full head back roars. So it's an excellent book. And video game wise, God, I've been getting into a bunch of old like JRPGs recently. But I'm just gonna go say Final Fantasy 14. There's never been a better time to play it. It's friggin' awesome. Like it's really, really good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Ciel, what about you? You can recommend something other than Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah, sorry.
So let's see, books that I've played. Books that I've played. Yeah. Books that I've read recently that are good. Circus Infinite by Conwan.
Yeah.
Just came out. It's really good. It's like circus on a pleasure moon, sci-fi. Really good. Recommend. Yeah, I'm going to recommend Final Fantasy 14. I don't care that you already recommended it. I'm going to recommend it. It's a perfect time to get into it because they kind of just wrapped up the like 10-year story that they've been doing. And if you haven't cried at least once by the time you finish Shadowbringers, you haven't played the game. So
true.
Go play it. It's amazing. It'll wreak havoc on your emotions and you will be grateful.
And that's what we want. We just want emotional roller coasters, right?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
I got to like the last 3 hours of Endwalker and I was just crying for like 3 hours straight. It would be like, here's a game mechanic. And I would be like, oh my God, it's a game mechanic.
Yeah, I feel you. That was me in Shadowbringers. I'm actually not at the end of Endwalker yet, but at the end of...
Oh, okay. I will not tell you anything. But the end of Shadowbringers also made me cry so hard.
Yeah, it was 4 straight hours of like emotional, like just sobbing and then playing for a bit and then sobbing more. Yeah, it was good.
Get the tissues ready, Nick.
Not to spoil anything for anybody in listening who hasn't played Endwalker, or not Endwalker, Final Fantasy 14. I promise I know how words work.
I promise I'm a writer.
I got to the part in Shadowbringers where you get to like the last zone of Shadowbringers. That was pretty much when I started crying.
Everyone,
and then I didn't
prepare yourselves. And Austin, what about you? A book and a video game that you can recommend?
For some reason, the book that's coming to mind is Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner. Came out in 1926. It was a bestseller in its day. About a woman who in London who ditches the marriage market, runs away to the country, and becomes a witch.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
I have to say, quite
those
inspiring.
are goals.
Fuck marriage! I'm going to become a witch.
Video games, I'm going to recommend something from the indie space. A game called 30 Flights of Loving by Blendo Games. It is a 15-minute or so game. It is the best narrative design work I think I have ever played. It is technically a walking simulator, but it has a lot of action in it. It is basically as if you did a better version of Pulp Fiction, but it was interactive and you condensed it into 15 minutes.
What's it called again?
Damn.
30 Flights of Loving.
Awesome.
Blendo Games is the maker.
Damn, that sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to check that out. And Jenny?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I haven't read a lot of books lately because, well, I have, but for blurbs, so I can't really tell you about them or recommend them. But one that I usually default to is A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe by Alex White.
Great book.
It's just, I've only read the first of the series, but I was actually going to maybe pick that for my video game one because I think it has a fun magic system in it too that would translate visually really, really well and be interesting. But yeah, it's just fun, good crew dynamics, found family, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so good.
So definitely would highly recommend. Same with games. Can't write in game. But I think Outer Worlds I played not too long ago. I just think it has really interesting world building. Like, you know, it kind of has that sort of Fallout vibe where it's like emulating a different decade in the future. But it's subtle and it's funny and it's fun and it's also like one of those things where you can see our culture reflected in it and you're just like the whole time. But yeah, I think it was just really fun and fast. Like it didn't take up a ton of time to get through. And I think there's been expansions since that I haven't played, but if you're looking for something that you can kind of accomplish semi quickly, it's a good one.
Yeah, that for me was like a really good condensed RPG where it's like, oh, it's kind of got the vibe of like Fallout, Skyrim, that kind of thing, but it's like 5 times shorter. And the visual style is fantastic. Like the artistic direction in that series is really, really good. And Ron, what about you for a book and a video game recommendation?
For a book, I'm like Jenny, I haven't read as much as I normally would in the last, say, year or so. But The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter was just like, that got me back into reading epic fantasy. I had been off it for a while for whatever reason. And that book just like, it floored me. It was amazing.
Relentless pacing as well.
Yeah, like it's just the amount of stuff it was like reading an epic fantasy written by China Mieville in terms of the amount of stuff that he managed to put in there and still keep it, moving. It was crazy. And game wise, I wanted to say Days Gone because despite the fact that I know it's kind of controversial in terms of people liking it and not, I loved it, but I'm gonna have to go with Control.
Ooh, yes.
It's just like, it's one of the few games I've replayed more than once. And even on my PS4, when it gets super crazy in the action and it glitches and there's bugs everywhere and the screen it can't keep up with it, I don't even care because the story is just weird enough. Yeah. And the action is just so much fun that I can pick up a copy machine with my mind and throw it at someone and just obliterate them. Like while you're levitating in midair. I mean, it's so much fun to play. And again, in the story is just so much fun. It's bonkers, but it mostly makes sense. It's not quite like Bloodborne where you have no idea really what's going on.
Yeah.
You do kind of get it. So
yeah, and that game for me is like, yeah, I mean, I know what you mean about like the chugging and everything like that. It's like if you're playing on PlayStation or last generation console, PlayStation 4, it's like the fan is just going wild. It's so loud, but it's
I didn't even realize because I had no experience in gaming up to that point, and Control was probably like one of the earlier games I played when I picked up the PS4, so I didn't understand that the game wasn't supposed to do that. Like I didn't get that the console couldn't handle like the frame rate and everything. So now that I know, I'm like, okay, but I still don't mind. I still love it when that happens, even though it completely interrupts the action. It's fine.
I think the fact that you got recently into video games helps with the fact that it's like you're just a bit.
Oh, I'm so forgiving. I am so forgiving. Everyone's like, "Oh, this has been done. Why this is so boring?" I'm like, "No, this is brand new to me. I'm here for it." So
you're every game dev's dream play.
I am. Like it will be brand new.
I feel like that too, though. I often read reviews and they're like, "Oh, like this pop-in textures," and I'm like, how's your fucking video game coming along?
Right?
Fuck your pop-in textures. Like, who cares? Just deal with it. Like, be thankful for what you got. The textures are coming. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
Be patient, man.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are so like short-tempered
Yeah.
when it comes to mistakes in video
Yeah.
games. Like, how dare the devs make this one tiny mistake that's barely noticeable? Oh, terrible game.
Yeah.
0 out of 5 stars.
Meanwhile, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, they can go patch that, and I've got my book that I can never fix again. So I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
it's just
Exactly.
The texture is like
I
Gandalf. It
found-
arrives right when it means to.
exactly.
Yeah.
I found a typo in my book, and I'm like, I would kill a man to be able to put a patch in and
Yep.
fix that.
Well, on that note, Ciel.
Sorry.
Yeah, honestly, Nick, Ciel, Ron, Austin, Jenny, really, really appreciate you guys diving into video games with me and just being here and talking about it. This was a lot of fun. If each of you could share where people can find you on social media, we'll start with you, Nick.
Sure. And I might just say it was really great to meet you all and fascinating to hear all your takes on this. Yeah, I'm on Twitter and under Nicholas_Eames, and on Instagram if you like pictures of books against a wooden table. That's your place. I'm your guy.
And that's the Book of Eames.
Oh yeah, it's under the Book of Eames. Yeah.
That wooden table. It's like those grains are just embedded in
Yeah,
it.
it's actually an old sewing table that was then my writing table, and it's just perfect for Instagram. Yeah.
It's a very nice table.
Thanks.
It's a good wood texture.
Thanks.
Yeah. And Jenny, what about you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm at JSDewis on everything. So that's just JSDEWES. Mostly on Instagram. I hate all the other things, but I'm there. And website too, jsdewis.com.
And Rubicon's out in early 2023, right?
Yeah, March 28th. I just got a release date
Nice.
a couple weeks ago. And then the third book of the Divide series should be out in the fall of 2023.
Nice. Awesome. And Austin, where can people find you?
I do very little social media, but on Twitter I am Grossman Books. I can be found there, although I pretty much lurk.
Wise.
Right. Very wise indeed. And Ciel, what about you?
I am on Twitter at Ciel Pierlot. I am also I have cielpierlot.com. I make things very simple. Yeah, that's kind of the only social media I do. I have a Tumblr. No one will ever know what it is. I have a Discord. I will not tell people what it is. So yeah, Twitter and my website. Yeah.
But now people know that you have a Tumblr and a Discord.
Yeah, but there's so many people on Tumblr. It's like
But they know now. They know.
yeah, but it's not connected to my real name at all, so I don't fucking care.
You should just tell them your Final Fantasy 14 server and character name. That's where they can find you.
I mean, you can, because that's not connected to my Tumblr. I actually started moving all my fan art. I never posted Final Fantasy 14 fan art to my Tumblr, so I started posting all my Final Fantasy 14 fan art to my Twitter.
Ooh,
So,
cool.
Was a galaxy brain move on my part.
Nice. And Ron, we'll finish off with you. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Writing Ron, and Instagram, my website, and I think Facebook. It's all Ron Walters Books. Pretty simple.
Awesome.
I'm
Fantastic.
mostly on
And
Twitter, lurking.
everyone's lurking. All right. Well, thank you all so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting about something that I love dearly. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you
you.
so much for having us.